Hey there, students and teachers. Welcome to session 6 of the TomRichey.net 8-month writing clinic. And session 6 is going to focus on explaining documents. Okay, so, basically coming up with a suitable explanation for a document to dig deeper into it and in a way that meets certain criteria. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a quick look here. We're going to be looking at explaining documents. Now, some people call this, HIP. Some people call it POV, POV cap, all kinds of different things here. But the language that's used on the rubric for the DBQ is for at least 3 documents explains how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to an argument. Okay, and so as far as that goes for 3 documents, so the student has to actually describe 3 documents. Then for the supports point that we've already looked at, they need to use 6 documents to support an argument. And then here they've got to dig deeper for at least 3 documents. Now, there's a little bit of discussion about which one's a more difficult point to earn: the 6 documents for getting the 6 documents supporting an argument, or the 3 documents explaining, because using 6 documents correctly in to support an argument is kind of a tall order, but it is a lower level task. I've chosen to group this with the higher level tasks because this is something that is an advanced skill, just like contextualization and just like complex understanding. We're talking about an advanced skill. And so as far as this goes, I've got a handout, which when I archive this session, I'm going to be noting that. The handout is addressing, as far as that goes, let's see, I call this handout POV Hold It Down. Okay, now some of the terminology may be a little bit dated, but it is there. Now, the thing is, the reason I named it this is because there was this viral video on YouTube, about 2014. So it's been a few years, but my students turned me on to it and I thought it was really funny. They thought it was really funny. And when I was coming up with this, I was thinking, okay, POV Hold It Down. It's basically this woman who gets arrested, and they accuse her of driving a getaway car after some sort of armed robbery, and she says, I didn't drive a getaway car. I can't even see, I'm legally blind, and all this stuff. So she's basically going over all this. It's available on YouTube. Just depending on which version it is, there may be a curse word or two depending, but it's a thing about somebody getting arrested, and the responses are so predictable. There is so much real life stuff you can get into here, because this really goes into analyzing, why people say the things that they say, and all of that. So let's go ahead and talk about this as far as what this is. Now, when we go into POV or context, audience, purpose, anything like that, on the old AP Euro exam, they just called it point of view. And so I still use that terminology sometimes. They change the terminology a lot. It's hard to keep up with. But when we're talking about point of view, typically there's something on the document that says something about, this person's demographic background, whether it's their occupation, their education, social class, politics, nationality, religious affiliation, age, gender, and race. These things all make a difference in how we view the world, in how we express ourselves, how we view current events. Tragically, there was a school shooting yesterday, and that's not something everybody intends necessarily to talk about in class, but you certainly see on social media the way that people respond to school shootings. You have the predictable discussion, and a lot of this depends on the person's political persuasion as far as the solutions that they put forward. So anytime we see something like this, we do see POV in action. Now, one thing I'm going to note here is that when we talk about gender, for example, like, just because someone's a woman doesn't necessarily mean that affects their point of view. So, when you're considering what to use, like, what should I elaborate on? There's more than one way to skin a cat. A lot of times you could go 3 or 4 different angles for POV, but gender may or may not be the best option. There's more to somebody's identity than their gender. But then again, sometimes someone's gender may make a difference in what they're saying. And so zeroing in on one of these things. Now, in addition to that, we can go into the reliability of a source. So, and then the background. So, first of all, context, or what the most recent rubric calls historical situation. What is going on in the background that might be helpful? Audience, who was supposed to hear or read this? Is this for public or private consumption? I had a situation, those of you who are teachers have probably been here, where there is somebody who's, got a sibling or something like that, and they say something in class, they repeat something that their sibling said, in the house, and, it's like, oh my goodness, I don't think that was supposed to be repeated. When that was originally uttered, it wasn't meant to be broadcast before a wide audience. And then that sibling just repeats that. It's like, whoa, I would have spoken a little differently if I thought that this was going to be in public. And then again, typically when people speak in public, they are trying to get something out of their audience, which kind of overlaps with the purpose of a document. Now, that's the other thing that, like, when we look at point of view, context, audience, and purpose, it's not just, they need to do at least one, but they can overlap. I mean, there can be some kind of like combined audience and purpose analysis, that works. And so it's not so much that they're doing one as much as they're doing at least one. And of course, there is going to be some overlap here when we're looking at these. And all of these things help explain the documents. Remember, we're really trying to bring these documents to life. And, we're trying to separate these from words on a page. These are things that are being said and or written by real people, with real lives. And so that's why this is kind of an advanced skill, because, somebody's going into a deeper explanation as to how or why this is happening or this is being said. All right. So as far as this goes, the audience and then the purpose. What does this person or group seek to accomplish? And, before reading, sometimes, I go at it like this, when you read that introductory stuff, about how, somebody's political persuasion or gender or social class, what do you expect this person to say? So if this is about the German peasants' revolt, for example, what do you expect a member of the nobility to say? What do you expect a Catholic to say versus a Protestant? So what do you expect this person to say? And then while you're reading, is this person saying what you expected? And then after reading, does this person benefit from what was said? And so as far as that goes, one way, especially if you're teaching AP European history, you go into Nietzsche, who, wrote about what he called the will to power. And essentially, people tend to say what is going to benefit them. So when I tell students that, taking AP US history or AP European history, that this is something that is going to be the most important decision of their lives, they might want to evaluate that through the lens of, I'm an AP US history and AP European history teacher. Perhaps I want, I want those students to sign up for the class. Maybe I'm having trouble filling my class or something like that. Now, one thing I tell students as well, like, there are students sometimes who say, I'm trying to encourage them to take an AP class, and, they say, oh, I don't know if I can handle that. And I just straight up tell them, I said, look, my principal looks at the score report and determines how good of a AP teacher I am because of the pass rate. And so if I really didn't think you had a serious chance of being successful, I wouldn't recommend this course to you, because I don't have any incentive to recommend this course to somebody who is not going to succeed, somebody who's going to frustrate themselves and me and, make my principal unhappy with all of those failing scores. And so, we're typically motivated by our own benefit. And so I think Nietzsche's analysis there is very telling. And so one thing that I've used in the past to kind of put this out there is, this Donna Godot video where she's being arrested and she's saying, I cannot see, I'm legally blind. And they're like, can you see at all? And she's like, I can see, barely. And, there's just all kinds of stuff in there where basically it's this person who is asserting their innocence, which is a very natural thing. It's exactly what you'd expect this person to say. Now, on one version of this video, it actually has them interviewing, one of her associates, and he just straight up he just said, "I'm guilty." He said, "I'm guilty. I did it." And so the thing is, now, of course, when that guy says, "I'm guilty" or "I did it," then one thing you have to think of is, okay, I'm prone to trust this person. They're admitting guilt. But then on the other side, I might say, who are they covering for? Is there somebody that this person's covering for, and why they are lying down so quickly and not even asserting innocence? Now, note here that it doesn't have to be certain, it just has to be credible. So if somebody saw a guilty plea as a document and they said, I think this person's, probably guilty because they said it and they don't benefit from it, or if the person said maybe they're trying to cover for somebody, as long as it's a credible explanation for the document, then the point is awarded. So, as long as with the information that's there in the box, the reader can see, this is credible analysis. Like, this person actually thought about this and it makes sense. And so, as far as that is concerned, we go with that. Now, a few other things to look at, some things like, tone. What if you were to hear this document being read, and that's something that a lot of students, have a hard, especially younger students, may have a hard time kind of getting a tone here. Like, for any of you who teach APUSH, I'm, when I have kids reading anti-federalist letters, there is one from a Montezuma, and it's completely satirical and sarcastic. A lot of kids don't pick up on it because this person's writing, we, the aristocratic party of the United States, we're having such a hard time, under the articles here, dominating the lesser sort of people who shouldn't be in the government. And a lot of the kids, it kind of went over their head. But I like getting kids to read a document like that because it teaches them, like, look, if something doesn't make sense at face value, consider another tone. Hey there. Hey. My daughter's about to go to bed. You want to say hey to the audience, Caroline? Hello. All right. You got your book? Yeah. All right. Well, that's good. You are reading. Okay. Good, good. I love you. I love you. All right. So good night. And so the thing is just looking at the tone, looking at motivations, here are some things. Now, this is available on my website, and I will also put it on the archive, but this is publicly available on my website. If you just type POV, hold it down. Eyewitnesses, perhaps they could be reliable. Now, retrospective sources can be problematic for the reasons I've outlined here. It's after the fact. They could have forgotten some details. They might be romanticizing, or they might be changing some details on purpose for self-promotional purposes. If the author is not identified, somebody may be more honest. Like, when you see YouTube commenters, for example, when they don't have, when somebody's got a fake account on social media or YouTube, they say things that they wouldn't say if they had to account for it. Foreign observers sometimes make some good POV. Now, another thing, we're considering audience. So a private letter to a friend, this person's more likely to be candid and honest. In a diary or journal, the same thing. The person is not performing for an audience. Posthumously published, just like Copernicus in his in his work, publishing it after he died, he's trying to put his stuff out there and not put any risk out there to himself. A public speech or an open letter. Now, that's something that I think it's important to go over with students. If you see something like this, I mean, if there were a source that's like an open letter, students need to understand like what an open letter is. It's like, so, Abraham Lincoln writing an open letter to, Horace Greeley during the Civil War, knowing that that was, to Horace Greeley, but really it's something that is to be read by the public. So the true audience of that, of that letter in 1862, I believe, right before the Emancipation Proclamation, was not the stated recipient, but the general public, because he was responding to criticism. Now, of course, when Lincoln wrote that, I'm, basically, if I could fight this war, free all the slaves or some of the slaves or none of them, I'm doing this to preserve the Union. What's going on in the background? He's preparing the Emancipation Proclamation. Also, if you consider that, he's trying to make sure that he keeps a hold on the border states, Kentucky and Missouri, states like that wouldn't have been very happy if Lincoln were to say that this war is about slavery or something like that, which, he'll say later, but not then. The official government document, now that could either be seen as reliable or perhaps very biased toward the government's point of view, party line propaganda or something like that. Now, another thing I'll note here is I recently published a video, and I was kind of hesitant, to be honest. I haven't done like current politics videos in a long time because of the political atmosphere right now. But as far as that, let's see. Did say it Richey. All right, so I made this video when President Trump allegedly said, something about some of these countries, in Africa and then Haiti and all of that. And so in this video, it's about a 7-minute video in which I analyze like what's going on there, because that's one of those things, people see something in the media. Well, who accused President Trump of saying this? And the person who accused President Trump of saying this, let's see. Let me see if I can find my if I can, yeah, I've got my slides here, so I can just give you all the crux of it. So let me go ahead and broadcast this again, screen share. All right. So as far as that goes, now what I did here is I laid out, and I do this in the video, and I'm basically looking at this point of view analysis. It's like who was in the room, and I've got them, basically organized from, most friendly to Trump, and then most hostile to Trump. And so you had the Democrat, you had a couple immigration moderates, and then you've got a couple Trump immigration allies. And, you could ask students, where do you think the accusation came from? Well, it came from the Democrat who was in there. And, so he said that President Trump said this word. Then the immigration moderates, they just did not say anything. Now, one thing when we get into nuance, which this is something we get in a complex understanding, even though these guys are Republicans, they're not necessarily huge allies of President Trump, especially not Senator Lindsey Graham from my state of South Carolina, who has had many back and forths with Trump. During the campaign, Donald Trump gave out his cell phone number, and neither one of them, would confirm or deny in public. Now, note too, Lindsey Graham told, his colleague, Tim Scott, that the comments, the allegation was basically accurate. But of course, Lindsey Graham, being somebody with a background in law, when you say basically accurate, that means something a little different than just accurate. And then Trump's immigration allies went from, once Senator Cotton said, I never heard him say it, and I was sitting just as close as he was. Now, then again, that's another thing that Tom Cotton, being, military guy, being from the South, perhaps he is very hesitant to accuse a colleague of lying. Some people are like, well, why doesn't he just, step up? But the thing is, to accuse somebody of lying can be a very serious accusation. Now, that didn't necessarily stop Senator David Perdue from saying he did not use the word. And then he went into a little point of view analysis himself and pointed out a time when Senator Durbin was in a meeting with President Obama and some members of Congress, and he accused someone of making a remark to President Obama, which the Obama White House denied that the person said this to President Obama. And so, he said it wouldn't be the first time that this guy has said this. So, the thing is, what this comes down to is when people ask, what do you believe happened here? Well, the thing is, everybody here says exactly what you would expect them to say. The accusation, the silence, and then, the denials from the allies. And so these are the types of things I like to occasionally use current events just to get kids to like look at current issues analytically and not necessarily just in a partisan fashion, but noting, this is how things work in the world and this is how we need to process information. And so as far as that goes, now a few pitfalls. Okay, first of all, attribution is not POV. They can't just repeat what was in the attribution. So, simply identifying the author and all that, that's not POV. There's got to be an explanation here. And the other thing is never use the word biased, and especially never use the word he's biased. It's like you're basically calling this person bias, using bias as like a noun, or something like that. So it's biased. But the other thing is, for if you're a student, never use this word. If you're a teacher, don't let your students use this word, because once this word is used, it's a word that, people don't think they have to explain themselves further when they say that. So the thing is, if you teach, AP European history, there's a great DBQ on the 19th century isms in Manchester. And this is, the 19th century isms, and you see this work in that the liberal is praising the Industrial Revolution. The romantic is, criticizing the Industrial Revolution. And so instead of saying that the romantic is biased, this guy is a romantic, and therefore he is, he is going to be, he's going to favor nature. He's not going to be a fan of the Industrial Revolution because romantics tended to oppose the Industrial Revolution. So explain, why does this bias matter? What does this bias mean for the credibility of the source? And do it without using the word biased or bias. And then if somebody says like, oh, of course she'd say that, she's a woman, or, he's a liberal, of course he'd say it. Press the charge and explain. So here, as a woman, she would be inclined to support equal pay because it would result in her making more money or something like that. Then remember excuse me. POV should follow, not replace your description of the government of the document's content. Now, of course, since the wording's changed, I will likely change my wording here. Your description problem, would be better here. I will mess with that in the near future. So it's not a substitute for describing the document's content. So it should come afterwards. So you should describe the document's content, using it to support your argument, and then the POV. Okay, and we're about to go over some stuff here, and just a note here about how I would bring that in. Okay, so as far as what we see here is that I would describe the document's content, and then I would do my doc 2, and then I would go on with my own analysis, you see? And so as far as that goes, that's the way I would do that. I would separate the description of the document, using it to support an argument, and then putting this afterwards. Also another thing to note is, don't assume that visuals are necessarily neutral. That's something to drive home to students, that, now political cartoons are easy to ascribe a point of view to, but often works of art have a point of view behind them. And then even data can be manipulated, as far as, there are 3 kinds of lies, damned lies, and statistics. And so as far as that goes, and I've got a few examples of POV in this document that y'all can look at, as far as that thing, as that sort of thing. Jefferson, for example, if Thomas Jefferson is arguing against the constitutionality of the national bank, this would be at least partially rooted in his opposition to central banking and any government involvement in the economy. So basically putting that into a broader context or something like that. All right. And another thing is that when you've got point of view, context, audience, and purpose, you could use for all three of your things here, and I would urge students to do four, but you could say, like, you could use context for all of them. You could do audience analysis for all of them. So, students may figure out what is the easiest one for them to do, and that can be kind of their go-to. And then if that doesn't work, they can go to something else. All right. So before I get into the demonstration, let me take a look at, let me take a look at the chat here and see if there are any questions and that sort of thing. All right. So let's see. All right. Yes, yes, yes. All right. So something good. All right. Let's see. All right, Thomas. Thanks for joining us on a train. All right. It looks like everything's good here now. As far as this goes, Nathan, this is gonna be your night because I'm gonna be looking at I'm gonna be using an APUS history DBQ that I wrote that I will also include with the archive. This is what I did is I wrote a DBQ a couple summers back on African Americans in World War I, and that's what I'm gonna be doing. So as far as this, now they could here's the thing, Nathan, that really it depends on the students, because if somebody were to say, like, the point of view of this document is, or sometimes people say the purpose of this document is. Now, the point I always drive home, it really depends on your objective. That's not great writing, but then at the same time, there's nothing in the rubric that talks about great writing. So, a lot of times with students and clients, I have to think in terms of, like, I have to tell people sometimes, like, look, say it as directly as possible. Like, the rubric is built so that the more direct you are, then there you go. But they don't have to use those words as long as it's clear that they're analyzing. Now, let me go ahead and go into the examples, and you can kind of see what's going on here as far as just the way that I would recommend doing this. So let me go ahead and open this up, and like I said, that this document based question that I made is going to be available on the archive page once that's all posted. Okay, so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, this is a great DBQ, not only because, right now a lot of APUSH courses, are around World War I right now. It's also Black History Month. So something to consider there. I need to revise this to get synthesis off there and put the directions on there. I will do that this weekend. So what I did here, to what extent did World War I lead to changes in race relations in the United States between 1915 and 1930? And so as far as that goes, I've got, 7 documents in here. I've got a couple of photographic documents. So I decided to have a few photographs in there. And so as far as that goes, let's go ahead and take a look at this DBQ. And so as far as that goes, it's to what extent. So you're getting into causation. And so as far as that, this was the main DBQ I used in last year's 8-month writing clinic. And so, what I did here is I've got 3 documents here, that the first 3 actually, that because this is a causation, so it worked well just to have the documents kind of presented in order. And excuse me. So my 3 categories are white supremacy in the progressive era, a negative impact on race relations, and continued discrimination against African Americans. And so as far as that goes, like, document 1 is a French source. Okay, so we see here that this guy is a French liaison to the American Expeditionary Force. And this was an internal memo for the instruction of French officers entitled Secret Communication Concerning Black American Troops, August 7th, 1918. Now, note, republished by W.E.B. Du Bois in The Crisis in 1919. Now, APUSH students should know who W.E.B. Du Bois is. The more advanced students may even recognize The Crisis as being the magazine for the NAACP, an official publication. And so this is in 1919, after the war is over. And so evidently this is something that they got their hands on, and they're publishing this for a purpose. And so basically this is trying to inform, like the gist here is this document is informing French officers, like, by the way, Americans are racist. Okay, so the thing is, the French, the French officers may look at, the Black American officers and think, well, he's an officer. I can shake hands with him. I can speak with him. I can fraternize with him because he's an officer. And this is explaining to the French officers that you can't really do that, because if the white American officers see you, fraternizing with the Black American officers, the white American officers will get upset. Okay, because in the United States, although a citizen of the United States, the Black man is regarded by the white American as an inferior being with whom relations of business or service only are possible. Now, here's the thing that, this is really valuable because it's giving that outside source. And of course, the purpose is pretty easy here because, this is to explain to French officers how to act and not to not to alienate these these white American officers. Now we see here an officer reporting to his commanding officer of the 368th Infantry in 1918. Without my presence or that of any other white officer right on the firing line, I am absolutely positive that not a single colored officer would have advanced with his men. The cowardice shown by the men was abject. The men are rank cowards. There is no other word for it. Now, the thing is here that, what we could see here, of course, there are all kinds of stories of, Black troops like the Harlem Hellfighters that are, getting combat decorations. I just posted the other day about Henry Black Death Johnson, who was just recently awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously by President Barack Obama. And so what we see here, though, is this guy, could he be rationalizing for a failure? It's like basically he's trying to say that the troops are cowards, and, essentially maybe he's trying to deflect blame from himself. Now, when we get into complex understanding, which will be the focus of next month's broadcast, we see here that, the 369th Infantry Division, the Harlem Hellfighters, they are, they're sitting here with their Croix de Guerre, their awards for gallantry. And so these men had shown courage under fire. And so that's a good way to put these documents in conversation with each other. And so when we see this and we go into that and we see what's going on there, now how would we write this first paragraph? So body paragraph 1, I wrote, during the Progressive era, white Americans believed themselves to be superior to Black Americans. This is evident in Major J.M. Merrill's report to his commanding officer, in which he referred to Black soldiers as cowards. Now, note here, document 2. And then I put here, since he was raised in a white supremacist culture, he may have been trying to use notions of Black inferiority and cowardice in order to blame his troops for failure rather than himself. Now, remember that the student doing this DBQ doesn't really have anything available other than what is in the source. So, I'm taking a guess here, but, I'm taking an educated guess based on what I'm seeing. And I'm also giving a bit of context because I'm noting, that the culture of white supremacy that was dominant at that time. And so then I'll go on to the next one here. So during World War I, Black soldiers served in segregated units, just as public facilities in the United States were segregated under Jim Crow laws. The French were not, that's a little attempt at some outside information. The French were not familiar with the American race relations and needed to be taught. And this is offering like a little bit of possible, context there as well, even though I'm going to offer something else here. So the French were not familiar with American race relations and needed to be taught how to conduct themselves around white American officers. In an internal memo that was leaked to the NAACP, a French officer warned his colleagues against being too familiar with black officers so as not to offend white American officers. Document 1. Since the French and the Americans were allies in World War I, it was important that French officers not offend American officers. The French officer's purpose was to avoid any conflict between French and American officers. Now, Nathan, this addresses the question you have here that I have no problem with a student just being frank here. I don't know if I'd go to the extent of writing purpose in the margin, even though, some people recommend that, and that's not necessarily a bad idea. It certainly makes it more apparent to the reader. But, I'm just saying here, the French officer's purpose was to avoid any conflict between French and American officers. And I find that purpose is often the easiest one to do because all somebody has to ask is, what is this person trying to get from this endeavor? And so as far as that, that's how I would tie that in. And so then, I've got, my topic sentence here, so I'm going to keep going here. Since the U.S. Army would not let African American units fight under the American flag, the French, who needed more troops, would borrow these units to serve under French commanders. Several African American soldiers, such as the men of the 369th Infantry Division, won awards for valor under French command, disputing claims by white Americans that they were cowards. Now, I could see myself as taking a pass here, but here's another thing, that this could be outside information or document context. Like, the thing is that there are some readers, now it can't count for both things, but a reader could possibly count this as, something like to say, hey, that is, that could be context for this document because, this picture shows these, you almost wonder, and this is kind of as answering a question here, the how and the why, that it's like, here is a picture of these men, wearing French decorations. And it's like, why are these men wearing French military decorations? That's strange. And so, even though I might think, okay, I'm trying to do this as outside information, which, could work, but if the reader's already given me credit for something else, that's why I encourage students to use, like, to try outside information maybe once per body paragraph, 2 or 3 times at least, because then you've got stuff in your, in your essay that could count as outside information, or it could count as document context. So that's what I would do with body paragraph 1. Now, then documents 4 or 5. Now we see here ghastly deeds of race rioters told in the Chicago Defender in 1919. Now again, somebody who's been doing their readings and maybe have run into a primary source. There are a lot of sources from the Chicago Defender, which was an African American newspaper. A lot of times when I'm teaching the Great Migration, I'll show some things from, show students some things from the Chicago Defender. And so we have newspaper and media. The context could be race riots and the Great Migration. So following the Sunday affray, the red tongues had blabbed their fill, and Monday morning found the thoroughfares in the white neighborhoods throated with a sea of humans everywhere, some armed with guns, bricks, clubs, and an oath. The presence of a black face in their vicinity was a signal for a carnival of death. Some of the victims were chased, caught, and dragged into alleys and lots, where they were left for dead. In all parts of the city, white mobs dragged from surface cars black passengers, wholly ignorant of any trouble, and set upon them. An unidentified man, young woman, and 3-month-old baby were found dead on the street at the intersection of 47th Street and Wentworth Avenue. She had attempted to board a car where the mob seized her, beat her, slashed her body into ribbons, and beat the baby's brains out against a telegraph pole. All the time this was happening, several policemen were in the crowd, but did not make any attempt to make rescue until too late. Now, the thing is, sometimes, if you look at something sensational like that, now, do we, we don't know exactly what happened. I've got a little exclamation mark here when I was annotating. And, you never know with media sources, could there be a bit of exaggeration there? Now, of course, this may have happened, but for a student to say, they might have been, I mean, we do know that there was a race riot and people died. Might, some of this, be secondhand? Might it be the paper trying to sell papers? Who knows? But this sounds, really, really bad. And for somebody to say something, it might not, it wouldn't necessarily, I mean, this is something where somebody is, questioning the source, or they could go into the context of the Great Migration. And so then there is a speech by Marcus Garvey in Cincinnati in 1921. Now, here is the point of view being, you should, if somebody knows Marcus Garvey, they would know this is coming from Black nationalism, from the point of view of Black nationalism. Also, it's a public speech. So Marcus Garvey says here, the white man has been fooling us for 300 years, and I am on strike of being fooled any longer. He has done all kinds of things to make us feel we are an inferior kind of people. Hence, they have made God a white man and Jesus Christ a white man, and the angels beautiful white peaches from Georgia. Everything up in heaven is white, according to the white man's teaching. Every Negro believes that God is white and that angels are white. God is not white or black. Angels have no color, and they are not white peaches from Georgia. But if they say that God is white, this organization says that God is black. If they are going to make the angels beautiful white peaches from Georgia, we are going to make them beautiful black peaches from Africa. How long are we going to stand for this propaganda of white superiority and black inferiority? Now, the thing is here, perhaps Black Americans were emboldened by their experience in World War I. Somebody could possibly, for some outside information, possibly refer to the Double V campaign. That this experience of being in war is causing, Black Americans who were expecting possibly something in return for their World War I service, they're not getting this in return. So you see, definitely in the wake of World War I, there is some frustration in the Black community. And so as we go into body paragraph 2, we note that World War I did not improve race relations in the United States. If anything, it made them worse. After World War I, there was a great migration of African Americans from the South to northern cities. African Americans left the South in order to escape lynching and to pursue economic opportunities that were available in northern cities, such as Chicago. Often, the white population in these cities was less than welcoming. In 1919, there was a race riot in Chicago in which many violent acts were committed against Black residents, several of whom were killed. The Chicago Defender reported a baby was smashed against a telegraph pole, document 4. While this may have happened, it is possible that the events of the riot were sensationalized in order to sell more newspapers. Now, note here, I'm not saying that this did not happen. It's just a possible explanation for something I read in the document that seemed very, very shocking, that a baby was smashed against a telegraph pole. Now, the other thing is, just like I said here, if a student is using, if a student is using a lot of outside information, it's very possible that the reader, if the student just has a lot of outside information, some of this can be document context. It's like this could either be context for document 4, or it could be, it could just be, could be outside information, depending on how the reader wants to read it. And so, somebody that's really good with outside information, you might want to steer them toward document context if they're the type of person who can go into what's behind the document. And so then, As a result of the increased tensions and the sacrifices that African Americans had made during World War I, Black nationalist movements sprang up, such as the one led by Marcus Garvey, who is often associated with the Back to Africa movement. Now, again, I'm giving, some outside information, but perhaps, this is something that, hey, this person knows a little bit of background here for the document, because that's basically what document context is, or they say now, the historical situation, which anybody who's been teaching this more than 1 year and has had to deal with all the terminology changes, hopefully you can forgive me sometimes for being a little loose with the terminology. Garvey suggested that Black people envision God and the angels as Black in order to oppose white supremacy. Document 5. Garvey's purpose in envisioning the angels as Black. Now, notice here that once again, I'm using the term purpose. I think that this is one of those things, especially with, some of your less advanced students, this is going to, and even if you're more advanced, you just want to take the path of least resistance. Purpose is typically going to be the easiest thing to do. So his purpose in envisioning the angels as Black was to encourage Black Americans to view themselves with pride as being made in the image of God, not necessarily to say that God was actually Black or any color. So there we go, with that. Now, document 6. Okay, so document 6 is the Assistant Secretary of War to M.E. Millett. Now, note here that this is over Millett. This is over a decade after World War I. The point of view is the U.S. government. I regret that you protest against the part of the pilgrimage regulations of the War Department which provides for the formation of groups of colored Gold Star mothers. Now, note, the DBQs typically have a little thing here. So this is an organization founded to provide support for mothers who lost their sons in combat, and widows. The large number of mothers and widows who will make the pilgrimage, together with the necessity of providing suitable accommodations for all, made impracticable sending the pilgrims in one body, and made the organization of groups necessary. After thorough study, the conclusion was reached that the formation of white and colored groups of mothers and widows would best assure the contentment and comfort of the pilgrims themselves. No discrimination as between the various groups is contemplated. All groups will receive like accommodations at hotels and on steamships. Now, note here, somebody could even get into like Plessy v. Ferguson with separate but equal. Now, and remember here, no discrimination as between various groups is contemplated. Now, note here that, of course, this is the government making that claim, but come on, do we really believe this? Like, oh, of course we didn't mean to discriminate. They're basically just, covering their own six and saying like, oh, we didn't mean this. So everybody's going to get the same accommodations, and the representatives of the War Department will at times be solicitous of the welfare of the colored mothers and widows, as they will be of the welfare, or at all times, yeah, the welfare of those of the white race. It should seem natural to assume that these mothers and widows would prefer to seek solace in their grief from companions of their own race. Now, of course, you could surmise here that this guy is obviously white and does not, really have any empathy for these Black Gold Star mothers, who are being treated as second-class citizens. And so, now this is the thing. He is trying to avoid, he's trying to avoid open confrontation. He's trying to smooth out the situation. He's trying to deny that there was any intent to be racist. All kinds of things you could do there. Now, document 7, note here that one thing you can note is that, there is President George H.W. Bush, who is awarding the Congressional Medal of Honor in recognition of Freddie Stower's actions in World War II at the White House in 1991. Now, the thing is, I mentioned, Henry Black Death Johnson, who got awarded a Medal of Honor posthumously by President Obama. And this what's happening here is the black soldiers in World War I did not receive their military decorations. And so this picture here, somebody notes that, like, hey, it's not every day that the United States gives a Medal of Honor, 70 years after the fact. And so, this is kind of putting that into perspective. And so, with this, I would note here continued discrimination against African Americans, later on. And so, as far as this goes, the third body paragraph, further evidence that World War I did not produce any positive change in race relations in the United States can be found over 10 years later when Jim Crow still existed, just as it had before World War I. In 1930, African American Gold Star mothers were told that the only way they could visit the graves of their sons was in segregated groups, Doc 6. While the government claimed that no discrimination was intended in this decision, the government official appears to be trying to cover his tracks and is denying the obvious intent to discriminate in order to silence a complaint he doesn't intend to address. Now, note, I didn't use the word purpose here, but I'm still talking about the document's purpose. And so then, furthermore, black soldiers in World War I did not receive medals for bravery from the United States as they had from France. It was not until over 70 years later that Corporal Freddie Stowers was recognized by President Bush for his brave actions during the war, Doc 7. Since 1991, now this is something here where I'm kind of thinking outside the box. And once again, as long as it's credible, somebody can say this. Somebody can speculate. As long as it's giving a credible explanation, a defensible explanation. Since 1991 was the year before a presidential election, perhaps President Bush, a Republican, was trying to improve his image among black voters who typically vote for Democratic candidates. And so, looking at what is motivating, President Bush to do this action perform this action at that time. And so hopefully this is kind of laid out, just how I would recommend, doing this, doing the document explanations here. And let's go ahead and go to the chat and see if anything's coming from this. All right, so let's see. Yes, and so if they don't have the correct, they get no correct. Let's see. The description of the document unlocks this. Okay. Now, the thing is, Thomas, I think that it is possible for a document. Now, if they're way off, that would be something. And really, I think in your classroom, like whatever you want to do is fine. Now, it's kind of hard if somebody completely misunderstood the document to do a valid POV SAP analysis. But at the same time, I wouldn't come out and say that there is a hard and fast rule against that. So, I would say, like, they may be a little off or they may not have, sometimes a student does what I call a drive-by description of a document, and they don't describe the document thoroughly enough to get credit, but they appear to understand the document's point of view. And so there could be times where I would give a student credit for this, but I would say 9 times out of 10, what you're saying is absolutely right, just by virtue of it being very difficult to explain a document that you really don't properly understand. Let's see. I think that now the purpose, so purpose with document 1, does that explain how the purpose affects reliability? Let me take a quick look at that. And so let's see. So I've got document 2, document 1. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, this definitely could go into let's see. So the document 1, French officer's purpose. Now, what is this as far as that? Now, I think reliability could go into that, but I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at there. Now, complex understanding. The main thing here, Nathan, and what I'm going to get into is there are a number of strategies for doing complex understanding. What I would say here is that now some people still like synthesis. I'm personally not a synthesis fan. Now, if there's a teacher who's teaching students who are taking their second or third AP history course, they're teaching upperclassmen, synthesis is pretty easy if somebody's a student that made like a 4 on AP Euro and now they're taking a push and they're about to make a 5 and they can make those across the Atlantic comparisons. Okay, that is, an easy road to complex understanding. Now, what I tend to emphasize, and we'll see what happens at the reading this year, is that the documents need to be in conversation with each other. So it's like, if we're doing, if we're putting the documents in conversation, and I'll kind of, like basically, I think when we're grouping documents, we're largely putting them in a conversation already. And so really, it's just going to be hard to figure out where the bar is for complex understanding. So, next month's broadcast is probably going to be a good bit of guesswork. I may even see about getting, somebody in to, chat with us about that, maybe so I can bounce, just me bouncing some ideas off of somebody, who may have some experience with this. But let me look into that and see what's going on there. But I think that after the reading this year, we're going to have a much better idea of like how are students getting complex understanding. What is the path of least resistance? But I think it's going to be a sort of thing to where I've got a feeling that this is going to be one of those points that is awarded with a lot of discretion. That like, hey, if you see an essay, like it's got criteria, but I think there's a lot of room when you read between the lines for a reader to say, like, you know what, I'm very impressed with this. Now, so for one thing, when you think about like document 7, yeah, that I'm like, when I'm looking at the black soldiers with the medals, yeah, somebody could note on that. That would be a great way to put document 7 and document 3 in conversation with each other, because the thing is that would be a complex understanding if the student is, looking at document 3 and they're like, oh, these US soldiers are wearing French medals, and then here is the president of the United States 70 years later giving an American medal. So if they're able to show that, like, yeah, the black soldiers did not get medals during World War I for valor, then, and using those two documents together to corroborate, I think that is a solid, that is definitely a solid complex understanding. So yeah, I would, if that's what we're thinking about, yeah. Now let me know if we've got if we've figured that out, Nathan. Now, okay, so document 1 and purpose. Okay, so let me go ahead and pull that up and put that on the screen again and see what we can do with that. I'm going to put it on the screen. You might want to, pause it or something like that. I'm going to put it on for a second, but I can't have it on the screen and see it when you reply to me. So I'm going to display it for just a little bit. There's a little bit of a lag on the live broadcast anyway when it comes to the live audience. So let me put that up there, and so you've got that now. And it was important for the French. Yeah. So okay. So what are we saying about reliability on that? Let's see. Okay. So I've got that. So it's purpose and clarify. Oops. Let's see. Trying to get this to where I can look at everything side by side. All right. Well, here's the thing, Nathan. Like, the way that I look at this is that, okay, when the reader is reading, and this is a great point, Nathan. I think I get what you're getting at. If I'm still not there, I'm gonna give you the code to come in and just chat with me directly. So let me know if I'm still not getting there. But here's the thing, that like there's nothing on the grading form where the person says, I'm giving this credit for document explanations, because they're using reliability, or because they're using point of view, or because they're using purpose. And so the thing is, it's really, as long as it's hitting the target somewhere, it doesn't necessarily matter what part of the target is being hit. Does that make sense? I think that that's the way to kind of look at it. That if they are addressing reliability and that sort of thing, and it kind of fits into that window and it's somewhere on that target, I think they get that. And yeah, the thing is, Jordan, in your situation, yeah, nobody envies a first year AP Euro teacher. So, yeah, and I think, and one thing I want to do, Nathan, I'm always like next year, this has been, I've gotten more subscribers this year than I did last year. And it's really encouraged me. I want to add some things to this next year. And one thing I want to add is I want to show people what is it that the reader actually fills out. And so that way people can kind of see that, they can see what is it that's actually being bubbled in. I think that's going to help a lot of people. I think that is fine. I think that reliability is always a good way to get into that, because that's really a lot of time. Yeah, and I'm definitely going to be doing some things next year to add value for people who resubscribe. And then that's some things are occurring to me, and it's like I've just got to get through this AP season. But once I get a summer, I can make this thing even better next year. I'm even talking to somebody that's taught AP World to try to bring that in next year. Yeah, and that's the thing that we'll also have a stronger sense of what happened at the reading. So hopefully every year this can step up a little bit. But yeah, I think that reliability is important, because a lot of times POV analysis, it's kind of like when we look at that meeting with President Trump and the 6 members of Congress, that when you look into that, it's like, okay, who's reliable and who's not? Who am I going to choose to make reliable? There are some teachers that talk about like getting students to rank sources. Like, this is kind of a thing I'd like to get somebody somebody in here sometime talk about this. But like, telling a student, like, rank the sources from the one that like you find most reliable to the one you find least reliable. And that way, and then it's like, why do you not find this reliable? Why do you think that this is a better source than that one? And that really gets students in the mix of like putting sources together. So anyway, with all that, yeah, there is a lot of vague stuff here, and I don't know. I'm very curious about whether the second evidence point, in actual functionality, is going to is the if the functionality is going to be, is a student going to need to use more than 2 pieces of evidence? I mean, or can a student use 2 really strong ones? How much does volume really help in practicality? So yeah. All right. Well, anyway, I think that I've covered all of this. I'm going to hold on for just a second, just in case anybody's got any other questions. Any more questions tonight? And we've only got really one more broadcast on complex understanding. And then we're going to get to April, where I'm going to be doing critiques. And that's going to be, I think that's going to add a lot of value to this. And I'm really looking forward to that. And so our next session, let me go ahead and take a quick look here. Let's see. Okay, let me take a look, see when our next session is. I believe that I've got this, to after my spring, or no, wait, before spring, right? Because it's March. Okay. So Thursday, March 8th. So this is going to be, I guess in about 3 weeks. Let me make sure that I'm not leading y'all astray. Yeah, in 3 weeks, Thursday, March 8th, we're going to chat about complex understanding. Now, just a warning to everybody, this is going to be pretty speculative, because this is one of those points, we're going to have to kind of see what's going to happen at the reading, and what is this going to look like in practicality. Hey, Lisa Britt, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us tonight. And let's see. Yes, thank you. And yeah, and that DBQ, I'm going to put that up this weekend, and I think that's a great one for, both World War I and going into, especially during Black History Month, a great thing to use there. So I'll be glad to put that in there. Yes, and Jordan, looking forward to seeing you again in a few weeks. I'm doing a live event in Berea, Kentucky at Jordan's school, and I very much appreciate the invitation. So looking forward to that. And that's actually going to be just a couple days after our next, our next session. I'm going to be over there on March 10th. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, y'all have a good night, and I will see y'all again on March 8th. It's always a pleasure.